York in chaos. Attack on America, a special edition of NBC Nightly News. Terrorists declare war on the United States, hijacking jetliners, crashing them into New York's World Trade Towers. Another airliner into the Pentagon, threatening the seat of national power. Thousands likely dead. Downtown New York in chaos. America wondering, what next? Brokaw in Midtown Manhattan, and tonight America is at war with terrorists after a stunning series of attacks today against targets in New York and in Washington, D.C., the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The terrorists used hijacked civilian airliners and their passengers as guided missiles in their attack. The most serious attack on this country since Pearl Harbor, and tonight the dead still are being counted. An unknown number still are missing. At this hour in this war, another development. There are reports out of Kabul tonight, the capital of Afghanistan, of explosions. But the Pentagon and the CIA are flatly denying that the United States had anything to do with those explosions. This has been one of the darkest days in America, and it is not yet over. Here at home now, a quick look at the locations where the 4 airliners hit. The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, 20 minutes apart. Then, within an hour this morning, the Pentagon. And then, the final crash just minutes later, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, 266 people on the 4 airplanes alone, all presumed to be dead. At the World Trade Center, even more than 9 hours now after this disaster began, officials do not know how many people were killed, how many still are trapped in all of the rubble. We do know that on most days there would be at least 20,000 people at work in the World Trade Center at the time that the airliners crashed into those Twin Towers. Another 90,000 could be expected in the vicinity of those towers in the course of an average workday. And of course, scores of police, firefighters, and other emergency personnel were in the area when the buildings came down. We're going to get the view now from the White House and our correspondent there, Campbell Brown, also from the Pentagon and from Jim Miklashevsky. And I'm going to join now with a complete account of what this day has been like from NBC's David Bloom, who's been my colleague all day long. David, bring us up to date.
Well, Tom, more than 9.5 hours since the first attack, the smoke billowing from the hulks behind me is now more gray than black, indicating that the fires have diminished somewhat, but it's still an extremely dangerous situation. Just within the last hour or so, a third building, a 40-story building, also collapsed. 40 more stories of concrete, steel, and iron crashed into the ground. A makeshift morgue has been set up near the World Trade Center. New York City police still sticking to their early estimates that the casualties ultimately may number in the thousands. Nothing more precise than that. We've put together a chronology of the events as America's watched, dumbfounded, and yes, outraged and defiant. The first attack plane, a hijacked American Airlines flight out of Boston, slams into the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center at approximately 8:42 a.m. Eastern Time. The explosions and fireballs broadcast live by television helicopters, which then, horrifically, spot the second attack plane, a United Airlines flight hijacked from Boston, taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's South Tower. It's now approximately 9:03 a.m.
Where the hell can I meet you? I'm across the street from the Marriott, man. A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building.
Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the 2 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling, and in some cases, jumping from the 2 buildings.
But there were people falling out of the sky.
At 9:29 a.m., President Bush in Florida addresses the nation for the first time.
Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
But in the nation's capital, just 11 minutes later, 9:40 a.m., a third hijacked plane, an American flight out of Washington Dulles, crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, the plane's wreckage tearing a gaping hole into one side of the building. Federal buildings are evacuated, government leaders taken to secure hideouts. 9:59 a.m., the until now unthinkable, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. An unknown number of people still trapped inside, including the rescuers, firefighters and police who'd gone in trying to save lives. Then at 10 a.m., hundreds of miles away in western Pennsylvania, a fourth hijacked plane, a United flight out of Newark, crashes 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. 1/2 hour later, 10:28 a.m., the north tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In all, 266 people aboard 4 hijacked planes are killed. Untold others in Washington and New York missing and presumed dead. In New York, a defiant Mayor Rudolph Giuliani.
The city of New York in the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists.
For the first time in U.S. history, the Federal Aviation Administration closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace until at least noon tomorrow. The U.S. military and American embassies worldwide placed on the highest alert. Navy aircraft carriers and destroyers deployed along the eastern seaboard. The president, now in Louisiana, speaks for a second time.
The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.
The president is then taken to the secure Strategic Air Command in Nebraska, meets with his national security team via teleconference before boarding Air Force One to return to Washington. But in New York late this afternoon, a third damaged building, the 40-story World Trade Center No. 7, also crashes to the ground. And emergency officials allow the first camera crew from NBC News inside the smoking hulks of the Twin Towers. Ground zero, cars overturned, steel torn apart, glass shards, small fires still burning. The very picture America most feared, the image terrorists most wanted. As to who might be responsible, a senior American intelligence official tells NBC News tonight that they are now, and I'm quoting here, 90% certain that Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born terrorist, was responsible for today's attack. This official tells NBC News, quote, "This is not just surmise, this is new information." The president plans to address the nation from Washington, D.C. tonight. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's David Bloom. And we're going to go now to Washington, where NBC's Campbell Brown, who covers the White House, is on duty. But across the street from the White House, the president is expected back there shortly. Campbell?
Tom, the president is on his way back to Washington tonight. We're told that Air Force One is being escorted by F-15 fighter jets on each wing. As David said, he is planning to address the nation tonight. One aide says his message will be one of resolve and reassurance. And Tom, we are reporting to you tonight a block from the White House at a hotel. That's because those of us in the White House press corps, along with White House staff, were rushed out of the White House this morning as the entire complex was evacuated. Needless to say, this has been an extraordinary day for the president. One aide says when he spoke with his national security team in a live teleconference today, he said, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences."
Steal. Yes, steal.
The president at a Sarasota, Florida elementary school about to begin a reading event gets first word shortly after 9 a.m. in a phone call from his national security advisor. One plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. Minutes later, Chief of Staff Andrew Card leans over and whispers in the president's ear. The reaction on Bush's face, the first sign of more horrifying news. A second plane has now hit the World Trade Center, with all indications this is a terrorist attack.
Today, we've had a national tragedy.
As Bush speaks, chaos at the White House. Staff and press are ordered to evacuate. People run from their offices across Pennsylvania Avenue. Crowds pour into the streets as buildings nearby are evacuated. People gather around car radios for any information. Fire engines blaze toward the White House. Shortly after 9:30 a.m., the president's national security team is in the Situation Room, a secure communications center in the basement of the West Wing. Vice President Dick Cheney is there, along with National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. Meanwhile, the president leaves Florida, his destination at takeoff a secret. We later learn he's landed at Louisiana's Barksdale Air Force Base. There, he pledges, the U.S. will retaliate.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
The president then flies to the Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, the U.S. Strategic Air Command Center. We're in a bunker there. He convenes a national security meeting, joining his team live by teleconference. Back in Washington, his top advisor, Karen Hughes, insists the White House has the situation under control.
Your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it.
By telephone, the president calls New York Mayor Giuliani and New York Governor Pataki. He also speaks with First Lady Laura Bush. The First Lady and Bush's 2 daughters are also rushed to secure secret locations. Mrs. Bush, on Capitol Hill when the attacks began, tries to offer words of reassurance.
Well, parents need to reassure their children everywhere in our country that they're safe.
We have just learned that Air Force One has safely landed at Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington. From our vantage point, we can see sharpshooters on the roof of the White House tonight, Secret Service patrolling the grounds, police cars driving up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House in a lockdown as we wait to hear what the president has to say to the nation. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. And there are so many questions, but a major question tonight. How could they hijack 4 civilian jetliners in such a precise fashion? How do they pull all that off? Our aviation expert is NBC's Robert Hager, and he's standing by now in Washington as well. Robert?
Tom, 4 airliners turned into deadly weapons. There's a nationwide hold now on all commercial flights. That's the first time that's ever happened in our nation's history. And it lasts at least until midday tomorrow and might last longer than that. And there are also some chilling first details of what may have been going on in those cockpits. But first, the facts. The string of events that results in these 4 horrific crashes begins at Boston's Logan Airport, 7:45 a.m. American Flight 11, 767, with 92 on board. Supposed to fly Boston to Los Angeles, but over New York State, it's diverted, forced to fly south, directly into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. A long day of carnage is underway. Back in Boston, United Flight 175, another 767, with 65 aboard, is already in the air, also bound for Los Angeles, 15 minutes behind the first flight, when it too is hijacked. This, the actual plane, as it hits the South Tower of the World Trade Center. 8:10 a.m., American Flight 77, a 757 with 64 aboard, has taken off from Washington's Dulles Airport, also bound for Los Angeles. It, too, taken over and loops back into the Pentagon. It slices in at an angle, leaving a deadly and ugly gash in the nation's military nerve center. And finally, 8 a.m. out of Newark Airport, United's Flight 93, a 757 with 45 aboard, bound Newark to San Francisco, hijacked as well, but crashes short of whatever its intended target is, comes down in rural western Pennsylvania. Eyewitnesses there.
And I heard a loud noise, and I happened to look up, and it was a plane. It was real low to me. It sounded like it was running fine to me. I just kept watching. I watched it go nosedive straight into the ground.
You could see where the plane had made the initial impact in the ground, and it was still on fire. It made a crater probably 30 feet by 30 feet, and it's probably 15 or 20 feet deep, and there's just debris scattered within probably a half-a-mile radius.
There are only 2 ways terrorists can sneak themselves or their weapons aboard planes, either through passenger screening or by going unscreened through locked doors into off-limits areas or onto the tarmac. Periodic FAA tests have found plenty of flaws. Found when government agents tried to sneak into secure areas, they were successful more than 2/3 of the time. Found testers also often able to sneak fake guns and explosives by X-ray screening. Once aboard, many speculate the hijackers must have disabled crews and taken over the plane's controls. More likely that than forcing a pilot with a gun at his head to fly right into the World Trade Center, for instance. Former American Airlines pilot Jim Tillman.
It is inconceivable to me that any airline pilot would allow anyone to force him to fly into an inhabited building. I cannot imagine how any pilot could be conscious or capable of doing anything to control that airplane at the time that it was directed at one of these buildings.
Terrorism specialist Neil Livingstone.
I suspect that what we're going to find is that the pilots were overwhelmed, perhaps dead already, and that trained pilots from the hijacker camp were in charge of those aircraft and were willing to die for their beliefs.
If there was time, the crews may have been able to press a button in the cockpit and send out a coded warning to controllers that there was a hijack in progress. Controllers may then have radioed back inquiries. But if the crews were disabled, the controllers would have been left in the dark for real information. Whatever else, controllers must have been surprised, in disbelief. There hadn't been a commercial plane hijacked in the U.S. for 10 years, since 1991. And now this.
There are several unconfirmed reports around that give little glimmers of what may have been going on in the cockpits. There's one from a controller in New Hampshire who says that a microphone was left on in the first plane of the day that was hijacked, that the pilot had his microphone keyed so it was picking up the what was going on in the cockpit, and that the controller then, off at the control center in New Hampshire, heard a terrorist say in English, "Don't do anything foolish." Then after that, the microphone went dead. The transponder of the plane went off. That's a device that radios information out to the radar, so controllers could only watch the blip. They could no longer tell what altitude the plane was at. There were several cell phone calls from relatives on board planes who reached their relative on the ground. One reported the terrorists had knife-like instruments, and there was one unconfirmed report that an American Airlines flight attendant actually reached her company to say that terrorists had killed the crew of her plane. Whatever else, we may know some more from the cockpit voice recorders, which could have survived those crashes and would give us an actual recording of what was going on for audio in the cockpits. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager at the Pentagon right now. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Henry Shelton. Let's hear what he has to say.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks and matched only by our unity to track down, root out, and relentlessly pursue terrorists, states that support them, and harbor them. They are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institutions are strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator John Warner.
Thank you. As a past chairman,
that is
preceding Carl Levin,
General Shelton, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, talking about the institution strong and our unity is strong as war. We are on a war footing, in effect, in this country, even though there has been no official declaration of any kind. But from a military point of view, political point of view, and certainly from a psychological point of view, we are at war with these terrorists. The question is, who are they? Within the intelligence community, all the fingers are pointing at Osama bin Laden, the very wealthy Saudi dissident who has been harbored by the Taliban, it's widely believed, in Afghanistan. Let's get more tonight on the continuing speculation about who is responsible from NBC's Andrea Mitchell now at her post in the nation's capital. Andrea?
Tom, tonight U.S. intelligence officials are mobilizing worldwide to try to find the culprits and make sure that they don't strike again. An attack on America coordinated with military precision. 4 planes, split-second timing, penetration of airports and airspace, no warning.
They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy. They cannot destroy our society. They cannot destroy our belief in the democratic way.
The first question tonight, is it over? The terrible answer, despite billions spent on U.S. intelligence, the nation's top experts do not know where or when terrorists will strike next.
The problem is that they are hard to penetrate. They are located in places that we're very hard-pressed to get any kind of information out of. And as hard as our agencies have tried, they've had some success. You don't hear about that. We only hear about the failure.
Who could have done this? Before today, the worst failure, the attack on 2 U.S. embassies in Africa 3 years ago. Again, perfectly timed, no warning, 224 dead. The alleged mastermind, America's most wanted terrorist, Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden also involved, U.S. officials say, in helping the man convicted of bombing the World Trade Center, Ramzi Youssef, 9 years ago, by protecting Youssef before and after that attack. Last winter, CIA Director George Tenet told Congress that bin Laden is capable of multiple attacks with little or no warning.
Osama bin Laden and his global network of lieutenants and associates remain the most immediate and serious threat.
Bin Laden's alleged Millennium plots planned attacks on 3 tourist areas in Jordan frequented by Americans, on Los Angeles International Airport, and on a U.S. destroyer in Yemen, all foiled. But 6 months later, terrorists do strike successfully, ram another destroyer, the USS Cole, killing 17. In June, bin Laden brags on this home video of killing U.S. sailors, a remarkable tape made to recruit more terrorists against America. And just 3 weeks ago, a warning to a London newspaper, allegedly from bin Laden's group, that he was targeting America again.
I think it is a dilemma for the United States now. I believe the only thing is, to revise their policies, to look at what's happening. Why, for example, the anti-American sentiment is very high in the Middle East and in the Muslim world.
How could this happen? Only from a massive intelligence failure. But in this case, at least there will be some evidence.
The good news is that the hijacking 4 airplanes is a very complicated operation. Even hijacking 1 is complicated. And they will have left some trail behind them. They will have had to have checked in, and they will have had to have purchased tickets either under their name or alias names.
If the U.S. cracks the case, how will it retaliate? Current and former officials say massively, but carefully.
If we're going to act, we need to be able to convince the world that we were justified in our actions. We had that evidence during the African embassy bombings, and I think it's critical that the intelligence community now begin to develop that with respect to these attacks.
Today, Afghanistan's Taliban leaders deny any involvement by Osama bin Laden. But as David Bloom alluded to earlier, intelligence officials and others are telling NBC tonight that they are 90% sure that bin Laden is involved. And Tom, if that proves to be the case, there is no doubt in anyone's mind that the U.S. will retaliate.
But the question is, how do they find Osama bin Laden, and who do they retaliate against?
They cannot find Osama bin Laden. They have not been able to. He is #1 on the most wanted list of the FBI. They have warned the Taliban that they will respond against Afghanistan's leaders. So the attack would be against Afghanistan. Within the last 3 weeks, they have warned Afghanistan that they will hold the Taliban personally responsible if Osama bin Laden attacks the United States.
Andrea, already there is talk about a massive intelligence failure. It's not so much the blame game as much as it is that this could happen again. There have been a number of red flags that have gone up for years now, but even in Washington at the highest political levels, people have refused to take them as seriously as this day indicates they should have.
Exactly right. I mean, in our report, Senator Warren Rudman, former senator, you spoke to him earlier today. He and Gary Hart, another former senator, had a blue panel commission, a blue ribbon commission. They warned that the nation's defense, the national defense here at home, not overseas, is the greatest vulnerability. That was in February and March. Not much has been done. The bureaucracy moves so slowly, and after the 1998 bombings, Tom, America's embassies were not greatly enhanced in their security, partially, but Congress rejected demands by 2 secretaries of state to beef up security to a much greater level overseas.
Thank you very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. The United States, at once so powerful and so innocent in its worldview in so many ways. Let's go to our Pentagon correspondent now, NBC's Jim Miklaszewski. Jim, you have some information for us about why these particular targets might have been chosen.
Well, these particular targets, first of all, the World Trade Center for its very high profile and the obvious trap that the terrorists set. After the first attack, they knew very well that all television cameras in one of the most media-intensive centers of the world would be focused on those twin towers, so that when that second plane came in with that horrific video of it striking the second tower, that would achieve a monumental victory for them. The target here, obvious. The most powerful, the center of the most powerful military in the world. Tom?
All right, thanks, NBC Jim Miklaszewski. I'm told that Marine One, the helicopter bearing the president from Andrews Air Force Base back to the White House now, is landing on the White House lawn. We do expect to hear from the president before the end of this night. He has had a long and challenging day beginning in Florida, then going to Louisiana, and then to Offutt Air Force Base, the home of the Strategic Air Command, before returning here to his office at the White House this evening. He'll be meeting with his national security advisors. By then, Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, may be back from his trip to Peru. Also, Condoleezza Rice, who's been in the White House all day long and informed him of all of this. And Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, Vice President Dick Cheney, who has managed to stay in the White House, too. These are the kinds of days that you know in the back of your mind may occur when you become the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief when you're on the campaign trail. But the cold, hard reality has been visited on this president, one of the greatest national security crises this country has faced in many, many years within his first year in office. So let's just watch for a moment and see if we can't see the president as he gets off the helicopter, and then under very heavy guard. There's extraordinary security now at the White House. The sharpshooters on the roof, people have been cleared out. Our correspondents are operating from across the street. We'll see whether we can see him as he moves from Marine One into the Oval Office. Mick, we had, as we expected earlier today, the president had a fighter plane escort coming from Omaha back to Washington, and my guess is that he must have had one earlier today when he left Florida and also when he went from Louisiana up to SAC. Jim,
it was shortly after the attacks occurred on the World Trade Center that the Pentagon went into a crisis mode. They were trying to establish exactly what additional threats there may be, and then it was just about 28 minutes after that that the airplane hit here. It was after the attack on the Pentagon that the Air Force then decided to scramble F-16s out of the D.C. National Guard Andrews Air Force Base to fly cover, a protective cover over Washington, D.C. It was something straight out of a war zone, Tom. One Air Force officer standing next to me looking up in the sky at the F-16 said, "My God, we're flying cover on the nation's capital."
All right, Jim, let's continue to watch here as the president still is on Marine One. We do expect that momentarily he'll be exiting that helicopter and moving briskly into the Oval Office. Laura Bush, he had talked to earlier today. She had been moved to a secure location. His brother Jeb Bush declared a state of emergency in the state of Florida after the president left today, a contingency that a lot of governors took around the country. Secret Service detail exiting first. There were Secret Service offices and a number of other government offices in the World Trade Center. There's the president now, walking to what will prove to be one of the longest and most important nights of his presidency. Back into the White House Oval Office. We do expect him to address the nation later. His father, obviously, was president during the Operation Desert Storm, the Persian Gulf War. His father had been the ambassador to the United Nations, director of the CIA, and vice president of the United States for 8 years before he occupied the Oval Office. There is very little in your experience as governor of Texas or even as a senator of the United States or almost any other job to prepare you for these kinds of occasions. Let's go to NBC's Campbell Brown. Campbell, what can you tell us about the plans for tonight?
Well, Tom, we're not sure as of yet exactly what time the president will be addressing the nation, but now that we do know that he is back at the White House, he will likely be joining the vice president and the national security advisor Condoleezza Rice in a room, what's referred to as the Situation Room in the White House. This is a wood-paneled room, extremely secure, in the basement of the West Wing. And in that room is a giant conference room. Around a big table, there are 10 chairs. There are about 20 chairs around the perimeter of the room, and there are 2 giant video screens that can open up where the president and his team can meet and essentially watch all of the communications coming in from around the country, or around the world rather. Right next to that conference room is a special communications center where 4 people are on staff 24 hours a day, military, State Department, intelligence, who are sifting through all the cables, all the information, providing them instantly to the president and his team. That's where the vice president's been all day with the National Security Advisor and other key personnel. In all likelihood, the president is joining them there now to get an update before he addresses the nation. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Campbell Brown. And at his side, he will have